Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for our third meeting of the Oversight Committee. I'm going to go ahead and share our agenda. We don't have too many items, but there is a lot of information that we are going to cover. So first off, I'd like to start with what I called our open issues, which is I'd like to update everybody on our consultant selection. So the Oversight Committee has been tasked with preparing a request for proposal and then taking the proposals that came in and making a selection for two consultants, one consultant that will be doing our independent investigation, and then also the consultant who will be performing our community risk assessment. And so I wanted to update everyone that the Oversight Committee has made their selections on the contractors. We will be having Scott Berger and Associates as our consultant for the independent investigation, and we have selected TRC as our expert consulting company with toxicology and risk assessment expertise to perform this community risk assessment. They are a local company who has done other work in the county in the past, most recently with the Keller Canyon and Marathon Renewable Fuels Facility in cooperation with Department of Conservation and Development. The update on this consultant selection is not only have we selected the consultant for the community risk assessment, but we do have our contract signed with them. So we can start talking about the next steps in terms of them performing their work. With that, the reason that we're hosting our meeting today is that we wanted to provide to the Oversight Committee a review of the plume modeling results from the Air District. We had partnered with the Air District to develop this plume model so that we would have information to give to the selected consultant performing the risk assessment to help them guide their soil sampling plan. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to Phil Martin from the Air District to provide us a presentation on the plume modeling results.
That's great. And thank you, Nicole. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Let's see. Can everyone see my screen now? And do you see the full screen or do you see a bunch of slides?
I see your screen in the slides. It doesn't look like it's in presentation mode yet.
Okay, there we go. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you, Phil.
Let's see. Let me see if I can do this and also minimize my screen here. Okay, so let's see. Let me go back to the beginning. So as Nicole said, we've been partnering with the Contra Costa Health to develop modeling and mapping of the November 2022 Martinez Refinery incident. And so what I'll do today is just kind of walk through, as we did at the city council meeting last night in Martinez, kind of walk through the work that we've completed and talk a little bit about what it means and how I think it should be used and some of the limitations. So I'll start though with just a quick overview of and a recap of the events kind of leading up to the release at the refinery. Late on Sunday of the 20th of 2022, just before Thanksgiving, there was an upset in MRC's fluid catalytic cracking unit, and so what you probably all know by now, but the fluid catalytic cracking unit is the part of the refinery where the catalyst is involved in breaking apart the oil products. And so so hang on just a second. Let me see if I can also, apologies here, but if I do this, are we back to the slide mode?
Yes.
Okay, 1 second. Trying to see if there's a way where I can see my notes and share the slide at the same time. Yeah, I don't see a way to do that. Sorry, I'm less familiar with Zoom than I am with Teams. But if you could bear with me for just 1 second, I'll be right back with my notes.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
Sure, hang on.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Do we have an address where the car that's in question was located?
We do. I don't have that right with me, but I don't know. This is a photo that we got from Contra Costa Health. So I don't know what your policy has been on sharing the locations of these photos, but there is an address associated with the photo.
Thank you.
So yeah, sorry. We'll start with just a quick recap of where we of what the events leading up to this incident. As I mentioned, the problems related to this incident started at MRC on the 20th, when they had an upset in their FCCU. And as I was starting to say, the FCCU is part of the facility that uses the catalyst material to crack the oil feedstocks. And then once that cracking process is complete, the spent catalyst is regenerated, and that's done by burning off the waste materials that have accumulated on it. And in that process, there's waste gases that are generated, and those gases are then vented to smokestacks in a part of the facility called the CO boilers, or the carbon monoxide boilers. And so those CO boilers are equipped with emission control devices that are called electrostatic precipitators, or ESPs. And electrostatic precipitators work by charging the dust particles and then using an electric field to trap them and remove catalyst materials and other particles that are remaining in the flue gas. And the reason I mention this is that because the ESPs were turned off at the start of the upset and then remained off until November 25th. And they're turned off for safety reasons. They're turned off intentionally to avoid the kind of incident that occurred back in 2015 at the ExxonMobil refinery in Torrance. So in order for safety, they're turned off. But what it means is that during this period, those ESPs were not functioning as emission controls. So then when the refinery operators went to restart the FCCU, they were not able to control a pressure imbalance that built up within the FCCU. And what happened then is that on the 24th to the early 25th, that pressure imbalance resulted in 20 to 24 tons of the catalyst material being released out into the environment. And so that's what you see, the result of the dust that was observed in parts of Martinez, as shown in the photo here. And I see a hand raised. If folks have questions, please feel free to interrupt. I'm happy to take questions. Did you have a question, Cheryl?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't get my hand back down.
No,
Thank you.
No worries. No worries.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's see if I can move to the next slide. Interesting. Interesting. Let me try sharing again. Okay, that's better. So since that incident occurred, both the Air District and Contra Costa Health have been actively engaged in a number of investigations and collecting information and evidence about the violations that have occurred at MRC. But what I'll be talking about today is really the work that we've completed in partnership with Contra Costa Health on the modeling and mapping. So the Air District has applied computer-based models to track the release of the catalyst dust and to map the dust as a result of the incident. And just to be clear, the goal of the mapping is not to identify areas of health impact, or not to say, in other words, that there was definitely a problem in one area and not a problem in another area. The goal is really to help conduct and to plan for the soil sampling. So this map here is just showing the area, part of the area where we applied the model. And you can see the city of Martinez, and then across the bay, Benicia, as well as the boundary of the MRC property in the gray outline. So before we started on any of the modeling, we really took time to understand what observations were available to us, and what measurements were available. And so in the days that occurred right after the release, the Air District and Contra Costa Health were both out collecting dust samples and making visual observations and taking photos of the visible dust. And those visible observations and photos turned out to be really helpful to the production of the maps. And so this is just showing locations where the observations were made. And the yellow symbols here are showing the locations where visible dust was observed. And the larger symbols here are the Amtrak station and the junior high school, and down to the health center going north to south there, but also showing locations where dust was observed and in some cases collected, as this are shown as the yellow dots. And the yellow lines there are showing roadways where Contra Costa Health went out and drove the area and saw visible dust. And the green symbols and lines are showing locations where observations were made or roadways were driven, but where no dust was observed. So you can see from the map that most of the observations where visible dust was observed is to the west and somewhat to the southwest of the facility boundary. So the other thing that I want to point out about the map are these dark gray triangles, and those are marking locations of wind measurement sites that are on the MRC property. And the wind measurement that's closest to the CO boilers where the release occurred is on the right of this map, the eastern triangle. And so those measurements, the wind measurements, were used not only just to look at the wind patterns, but also to evaluate our wind models. So we ran a three-dimensional wind model that provides information about what the winds are like, not just at those observation locations, but throughout the whole area. So we can really get a sense of what where the plume went and where the deposition occurred. So for that 2-day period from the 24th to the 25th, the winds were mostly from the west, somewhat to the southwest and northwest on occasion, but they were light from about 2 to 6 miles per hour. And that is pretty much corresponds with what you're seeing here, is that the material was blown mostly to the west. So
you just said from the west, but then it's going to the west.
Sorry, I meant, yeah, I meant to, they're blowing toward the west from the east.
Okay.
Yeah. So in order to track where the dust fallout from the incident occurred, we applied a computer-based air pollution dispersion model called CalPUF. And what CalPUF does is it tracks puffs of air pollutants, and it simulates the transport and the fallout of pollution that's emitted. And in order to run this model, we need to know how much catalyst was emitted, not just the total, but we also need to know hour by hour during that 2-day period when the emissions were occurring. And the reason for that is, because the winds are varying from hour to hour, getting the release time right is important. So for the total, we used that upper level, we used 24 tons of catalyst as the amount that was emitted. And then to estimate the timing that we need, we used sensors that are in the CO boiler stacks. And these sensors monitor opacity of the flue gases. In other words, how thick, how dense the particles are within the flue gas and so unfortunately the sensors don't give us an exact read of what the level of emissions are, but they're the best source of information they have. So we took the emissions as being proportional to the opacity reading that were in the two active CO boiler stacks. So this figure here, it is summarizing the total emissions from those two active CO boilers during the 24th and early 25th. And you can see again that most of the emissions occurred late on the 24th and early on the 25th. Now, another key piece of information that we needed in order to run the models was the size of the particles. And that's important because the smaller particles tend to hang in the air longer and can be transported downwind further. So for the information about particle sizes, we relied on information that we had about the size of the catalyst in different parts of the processing stream. And so we selected 3 different sizes, 24, 50, and 85 micrometers as being representative of the particle sizes that were coming out of the stack. And just so that you have kind of a visual sense on this, the 85 micrometers is roughly about how thick a human hair is. And so you can definitely see particles of that size. Again, though, because, yeah, I see a hand raised.
Phil, Tony Simmons, I got a quick question on the particle size.
Yeah.
The first slide you showed of the windshield, those particles were much higher than 85 microns. Wouldn't that be in the area of 1,000 to 1,500 microns?
There were some particles of that size deposited, no doubt. But what the best information we have about the catalyst within the facility is that it's not that large. And what we think is happening is that after it's emitted, the particles are kind of adhering together or clumping together. Now, again, this is not we don't know for sure. It is possible that, that the information we have about particle sizes within the facility is not right. But the best information we have about catalyst before it's released is that they're smaller. I think they're larger. Yeah, definitely see larger particles once they're, the sampling shows bigger particles than that for sure. But we think what was emitted was smaller than that. Yeah, another question.
Yeah, I think the significance of pointing out the aggregated clusters of particles is that the dispersion and deposition would key more on the size of the clusters than the size of the particles in the process.
It's definitely true. And so that, you're right. Like, when did that aggregation occur? we don't know. Like, did it occur, after it's hit the ground and, moisture condensing, or is it happening when the particles are heated and being released from the particle? I mean, from the stacks. We don't have great information about that, but it is part of what makes this modeling uncertain, and so why we're putting such big caveats around the final map. But this is our best information about the size of the catalyst when it's coming out of the stack. And again, it's possible that it's accumulating. Like, when does that occur? We don't know. Does that make sense? I mean, do you understand?
Yeah, I completely understand. So, I mean, I have seen video, like from Ring doorbell footage that shows particles more consistent with the large size that you see deposited on windshields, for example. So it more on the order of 1,000 microns than 85 microns in the air, and a substantial density of those.
So sorry, where you're seeing video of the particles in the air?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Is that something that you have shared with the health department?
I believe that's publicly available.
Okay, well, I can follow up with you. Because, like I said, the size of the particles is one of the big uncertainties that we have in generating these maps. Yeah, I see another hand raised.
Yeah, this is Josh Chatham with Benicia. I'm curious, so we're doing all of this modeling months later, and there was some samples taken, I'm assuming the green and the yellow on that first page were like right after the incident.
Yeah.
Was there just only, you tested a couple schools in the Amtrak station, or was there any testing? Did anybody come to Benicia and look around or farther out through Martinez to see how far the visible dust landed?
Not to the best of my knowledge, yeah. And in fact, it was only the modeling that suggested that we should be looking in Benicia. I don't think there were any complaints. Well, I know there were no complaints to the Air District from Benicia.
And the modeling is just totally based on guesses on the size. And I mean, really the only thing we know would be, I guess, the wind.
Yeah, the only thing we know is the wind at the surface, right? And so, the models that we're using are estimating the winds aloft, and we're using the size information from within the refinery of, what the particle sizes are. Now, once the particles hit the air, they no doubt they do accumulate and lump together. We don't know exactly what those dynamics are.
Okay.
But these are great questions. But so because of the uncertainty in the particle sizes, we used those three sizes and we ran the model 3 times to develop a composite map in order to inform the soil sampling. So in other words, the map that you see is the result of running the model for 3 times once with each of the sizes for the 2 days, and then averaging the results together. So here's the map that we have generated. It's showing the estimates of the dust fallout on outdoor surfaces, and just take a quick minute to kind of reorient you. It's again showing the observations that we just looked at, but now it's also showing blue contours, and darker blue here means more dust fallout. And the units of these modeled contours are in grams per square meter. So in other words, an amount of material deposited per area. And so roughly a gram is about 1/4 of a teaspoon of the catalyst material, and a square meter is about 10 square feet. So looking at the darkest areas on the map, if we look at the edges, they're extending out to 1/10 of a gram per square meter, and that's roughly 1/10 of a quarter teaspoon per 10 square feet, just to give you a sense of something that's maybe more relatable than grams per square meter. So I will note that where the darkest areas are occurring is generally agreeing with the observations of visible dust. In other words, the yellow areas where the visible dust was observed tends to match the modeled dark blue areas. But then the dark blue extends further out. So here's that same map, but now zooming out a bit, and you can see a bigger area. And just a few things to also point out. First, that the lightest contours extend well beyond Martinez out to Crockett and nearing El Sobrante, or covering El Sobrante. But the levels at that lightest blue are much less. And if you look at the legend on the map on the right there, the highest levels in the light blue areas are 10 times less than the lowest level in the dark blue area. In other words, if we look at the edge of the dark blue, which is at 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter, and then compare that to the light blue, the lightest blue is at least 10 times less. So in other words, just trying to orient you to the scale on the map. The second thing to point out, is you've noticed, is that the dark blue does extend out into Solano County, into Benicia. And as I mentioned, it's because of this map that we're thinking that we should be perhaps looking in Benicia to do some sampling as well. So just, taking a step back, how is this map going to be helpful? It generally does agree in the areas where we did see visible dust, but it also suggests looking and sampling soils in areas where there were no observations collected. So we think it will be helpful, but as you guys have already noticed, there's some pretty big limitations. The timing of the catalyst emissions, we don't know. Those opacity sensors are kind of a rough guide, but certainly once those sensors are saturated or kind of maxed out, we don't really know how much material goes out. So it's only a rough guide on the timing. And then, as you guys have correctly noted, lots of things can happen to those particles once they're leaving the stack. They condense, they accumulate, they bunch together, and that can affect the deposition rate and how far they travel. Also, in view of the large amount of rain that's happened since the catalyst material was deposited initially, that could definitely have moved around the material. And so it's really the soil sampling that I think you guys are going to be overseeing is what's going to tell us where the impacts really were. And so the other thing that I didn't talk about is that, this refinery has been operating for decades, and there's a light amount of this material coming out all the time. And so how much of that is also, is it already in the soil? So there's a lot of questions that this modeling does not address that really the soil sampling will have to tell us what the impacts are. So what are the next steps? The Air District is continuing to investigate some of the violations that occurred at MRC. And certainly the group at the Air District that generated the map will be available to assist you in any ways that you think are helpful to in helping to plan the soil sampling. And then maybe at least last night, Nicole had some next steps that were really helpful in talking about what the county is planning to do.
Yeah.
So that concludes what I have, but I did see a hand up. I don't know if there's more questions about the presentation that I'm happy to address.
So Phil, I'd love to talk about CC Health's next steps. And then the way that we typically do this is I will ask for questions from our Oversight Committee, and then we'll move to the public comment period portion of this for the members of the general public.
That sounds great.
Great. So first and foremost, before we talk about the next steps, I did just want to thank Phil and the Air District for their partnership and expertise in developing this plume model. As we discussed at the beginning of this meeting, the Oversight Committee has made their selection on the consultant who will be performing the work, and that will be TRC Solutions, a locally located company here in Contra Costa County. We have completed the contract already so that we can now go to the next steps of having TRC developing a soil sampling plan. So I want to clarify a few things. The Oversight Committee in their selection of the consultant had a proposal sent to us. This proposal was reviewed. The consultant, conducted an interview where the Oversight Committee was able to ask clarifying questions and understand the methodology that was proposed by the selected company. And the Oversight Committee has selected this consultant and approved their methodology to be used. We are deferring to TRC now in terms of developing the soil sampling plan through the information that we have been able to provide from them, from the sampling that we have done here at the county, the sampling that we have. It's the same sampling that we have listed on our website, and also through this modeling that has been done for us by the Air District. So I want to make very clear that the modeling is not going to be the sole source in the development of the soil sampling plan, but it is one of the sources that is going to help guide in the consultant selections of the locations in which they are going to be doing their sampling using their methodology. From there, they will be conducting the soil sampling. They will have the lab results done, and then they will provide the report to us. In my conversations with the consulting company, their estimated timeline right now is that we can have all of that completed by mid-May, which is when the draft report would be brought to the Oversight Committee for review, and then we can finish the rest of the steps that the Oversight Committee has laid out for finalizing this, including our public comment period and ending with presentations to the board and any city councils. So I just kind of wanted to give everyone that clarification on what the next steps are here on County Health side. And again, thank you very much, Phil, for being here and providing this information to us. I'm now going to open it up to questions and comments from the Oversight Committee. So I saw Tony's hand first, and then we'll move to Josh.
I have a couple of questions for Phil. Phil, did I understand you to say that the model is based on 48 hours?
That's right.
Pardon?
That's correct.
Well, if the release was only 6 hours or 7 hours, and we did the model based on when the release actually happened, how would that change the model, if any?
So maybe I don't understand the question. So once the material is deposited, it doesn't go anywhere. So we're not diluting material that's deposited by running it longer than the period of emissions. Was that your question? Or maybe
what I'm trying to get at, I'm familiar with the way smoke goes and with some of the Aloha and Cameo models in the fire service. But I thought if you did if the modeling was done when the actual release happened, and you didn't do it over 48 hours, that you get a clearer picture of where the release went. The 48 hours, the wind changes, you got wind going in a different direction, and you're not having this very large amount of catalyst coming out. Doesn't that change the model? I mean, we're looking at, what I'm trying to get at, Phil, is the people in Martinez are concerned whether or not their land is contaminated. When I look at that model that you have, I don't think the model is totally accurate. I think we need to make sure we have a model that shows exactly where we think the release went in that 6 or 7 hour period. This is important to the people. I mean, we've got people that have been really concerned for the last four plus months. And what we're trying to do is give them some information that's useful So I'm just asking the question, is this an, I'm trying to say, is this really an accurate model? And if the sizes of the catalyst were bigger than the 80 based on video documentation and some other documentation that's out there, would that change the model?
Well, the latter point would definitely change the model, and that's one of the things that I'm stressing, is that this model should be taken as a guide, given the best information that we have available, but it should not be taken as a indication of where there are impacts and where there are not impacts. That should be really the domain of the soil sampling. To your former point, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but we definitely modeled the 6 hours when the most of the release was occurring. If you look at the emissions profile, the emissions started on the 24th and built up and then dropped off on the 25th. So we're including that whole period in our model. So all of the deposition that occurred, and then deposition that occurred later on in the latter part of the 25th is also included in our modeling. So I may be missing your point of the first question, but we're definitely including the period where the emissions occurred.
And if I can just add on, Phil, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind bringing your presentation back up and going to the slide that, shows the areas that we observed. I think what we can say is that the model, and once it's on screen, we can, visually see this. The model is generally agreeing with those areas where we had visually observed deposition, whether that being from the observations made from the Air District or from Contra Costa Health, as shown through those yellow routes. So that was also taken into consideration when you guys were developing the model, right? As, it was this agreeing generally with what we had already seen. I think one of the points that I want to clarify is that, when we are talking about the soil sampling plan and the methodology that is being brought forth to us from the consultant, this is to be used as a guide, but it is not, there was a lot of questions last night, and I want to make sure we're very clear that, when we're focusing on the different colored areas, it does not mean that one colored area is going to be the only place where soil sampling is going to be taken. We don't know right now what those bounds are going to be. That is going to be set by the consulting company. We're providing this to them as a guide, so that they are able to make their best judgment in choosing the areas and locations. So I don't want it to be, assume that if you're in one color on this map versus another, that it means that you're not going to get soil sampling. It also doesn't mean that sampling is going to occur in every area where you see a certain color, even in the areas of greatest deposition. All of that, the number of samples to be taken, the areas, the boundaries of those samples to be taken are going to be determined by TRC. And I also failed to mention that as part of this analysis, after we do that initial soil evaluation and screening level risk assessment, if it is found that there is, levels of concern and potential effects, and we need to widen that scope more from what we already had in terms of our bounds, they will immediately begin that sampling and doing that work. But it's not going to be only focused to one area of this map. And again, the map's not going to be the sole source that they're using when they develop this sampling plan. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, of course. I see.
Okay, so Josh was next, and then I have Cheryl and then Ken.
Yeah, my question is really more for Nicole. Just to clarify, when you were talking about next steps, it sounds like we've selected TRC. Did I understand that they were going to develop their plan, do their plan, and then come back to us in May-ish, or were we going to see what their plan was before they actually go out and do it?
So we don't have a soil sampling plan from them right now. They're going to develop that plan and initiate the soil evaluation. So we don't,
so I guess just to get straight, what I'm getting at is, if they chose not to do Benicia, we wouldn't know until it was done, and they already went through and didn't do it.
Oh, I see what you're asking right now. No, I think that we will have periodic updates from TRC as they're going through this. Sorry, okay. I understand what you're asking now.
So we will be able to communicate with them at some point during this process and make sure we're on board with their plan.
The Oversight Committee will be informed of what the plan is, yes.
Okay, that was it. And then also that map does, we keep talking about the map aligning with the green and the yellow, and the way I'm seeing a green, meaning dust was not observed where there's the darkest blue in one area. So
yeah, the agreement is not perfect at one of the schools, but it is near the boundary of the, you know, where the model is showing less deposition.
Okay.
But you're right, the agreement's not perfect.
Okay, I had Cheryl and then Ken.
Okay, thank you. Based on, and this is mostly for Nicole and the group, not so much you, sir. Based on the Oversight Committee's concerned at the time of the RFP and the concerns we heard from the City Council last night, it doesn't appear that 6 samples is nearly enough for us to do this report that we're asking the consultants to do. And I would say that waiting to hear if we're going to be able to input before they've already done their work and all of that means we need to go after it at this point. And I think it's kind of easy. Now I'm hearing that some of this was testing, original research was done based on the complaints that were made. And I know people in this neighborhood did not make complaints. We expected the county to come to us to do the testing. So I'm going to suggest that we get more proactive about those 6 samples and make sure that we've at least got 10, and at least one of them needs to be in Benicia, because getting a soil sampling on the small area based on this smaller area in yellow is not going to be adequate. We know it's not going to be adequate for the community. So we need to be proactive on that point. And that's the point I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Ken?
Yeah, I did want to make available. So Phil, yeah, let's speak. But we can also provide you with other process measurements besides opacity that will help you bound the time of the release. So for example, level in the regenerator and differential pressure across the 4-stage separator are good indicators of where you had catalyst, where you didn't want it.
Yeah, I think that could be helpful. And if you also have information, you know, about different catalyst sizes, like are there larger particle sizes in the catalyst before it's released? That would be good for us to know also.
Yeah, I think so. The individual particle sizes, I think the electron microscope images are pretty accurate for the individual particles. It's really the aggregation of the particles that that causes the clusters of considerable size.
And does that, in your opinion, happen after the release?
It would be after it's released from the stack.
Yeah.
I did have that question for Gail Hofnagel with TRC as well, and they're aware of the phenomenon, and he has modeled that before.
Great.
Thank you, Ken. And I will mention that one of our next steps is we are going to be connecting TRC with Phil as well, so that they can discuss in more detail the plume modeling that was done. Okay, Nick?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Phil, you had mentioned that there's, these particles are typically coming out. At what stage in this risk assessment will, the difference in particles be made? So, if you're finding some in one spot and some in the other, is there a way to tell the difference between the two? And then at what point will, like an acceptable amount or something be determined, and who would be determining that amount?
I think that's probably a question for Nicole, because that's the question of like what's an acceptable amount, like is really like what determines an impact. And I think that's going to be part of the sampling plan, but I'll let Nicole speak to that.
That's right, Phil. As part of our soil evaluation sampling plan, that is exactly the work that TRC is going to do for us and be able to give us levels that they're using in comparison as they do these cumulative risk calculations to make their determinations. Okay, I see Lauren has her hand up, so we'll go to Lauren next.
Thanks, Nicole. I just want to say that I agree with Josh and Cheryl on just getting a view on what the soil sampling plan is. But I also just want to note that TRC was in attendance at last night's city council meeting. For the whole extent of the meeting, I would imagine they're probably listening in on this meeting as well. And so I would hope that by way of hearing our input, attending this meeting is a great way for them to take in that feedback. So I just wanted to make note of that to the other committee members.
Thank you, Lauren. Does anybody on the Oversight Committee have any additional questions before we move to public comment? I don't see any additional hands raised. So we'll now move to our public comment session. I see first Anna has her hand raised, and then Chris, and then AG, and then Heidi. So Kayla, if we can promote Anna, please.
Sure, we're doing 2 minutes of public comment per person, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Anna, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thanks so much. And this is actually a question. Please forgive me. I don't remember the name of the unit that the particles were measured in, but and if you already said this, I apologize for asking, but what is the significance of the different size of the particles? Because there was some debate about the particle size in the beginning, but I'm just wondering what that tells us. Hopefully that made sense. That's all.
Yeah, that made perfect sense. And the units we were using is micrometers or microns. And the reason it matters is that larger particles, at least in this size range, fall out for fastest, so a smaller particle will hang in the air for longer, and so travel further downwind, so it will affect the pattern of the deposition and where most of the deposition will occur. Is it okay, Nicole, that I'm answering questions, or do you you should tell me if
No, that's fine. I believe that was best addressed by yourself, Phil. Thank you so much. Okay. We'll now move to, I'm sorry, it was Chris next, and then AG, and then Heidi.
Chris, go ahead when you're ready. Your time starts now.
Okay, well, it shouldn't take me long. My name is Chris Ambrose with Solano County, CUPA, or also Environmental Health for the county. And I just want to, it's not so much as questions that I have, but basically just to let you know that our presence, or we are present in this whole process, and that we will work with you. We were kind of brought in a little later than we wished, but better late than never. At this point, if you need to come over and do some sampling on the other side of the bridge, we'll be glad to accompany you in, or I guess it would be TRC in this case, at whatever site that they would need to go to in the capacity of the Environmental Health Department. So I just want to let you know we're on board. We're very interested to see the sampling plan that gets put in place. And yeah, just keep us in the loop. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate that. And we will continue to coordinate and keep you updated. Thank you. Okay, next we have AG.
Hi,
I just had a question about an exchange from just a few minutes ago. Ken Axe in his discussion with Phil Martin, said that they had data to assist in the production of the plume map. I was curious, in the development of the plume map by the Air District, has there been discussions with MRC, or has this been done, was that plume map done without any information from MRC to this point? And then my other question is, did the plume map use data from the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program's data, that independent community monitoring data that they have in Benicia? Thank you.
Would you like me to address that?
Yes, please, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have received some information from Martinez. We have requested information from Martinez Refining Company. We've requested some information and received information. We haven't shared the modeling or the findings with MRC to this point. So this is the first time we've released it publicly. Was last night. And so, we're certainly happy to have discussions, of course, with MRC. And if they have suggestions for additional data that they have that we didn't ask for, we're happy to follow up on that. And with respect to other measurements, we have looked at monitoring, air quality monitoring locations. Most monitoring locations don't record particles of this size. These are big particles. So in general, like fine particulate matter modeling will not be helpful for evaluating the model itself because of the large size of these particles that aren't measured at most monitoring stations, at any air quality monitoring station that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, next we'll go to Heidi and then Jillian.
Heidi, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi there. My first question is directed to Ken. It continues to amaze me when we learn that MRC has information that has not been shared with BACMed. And so people are busting their butts to put this plume map together so that we can do soil testing. And you tell us in this meeting today that you have ring video of particles that are relevant. So my question is, what else do you have? Because I remember before I was blocked on MRC's Facebook page, that Ann Notarangelo was contacting people after the fallout and asking for addresses and pictures and videos, etc. So I'm actually demanding as a resident of Martinez that you disclose all of that information to BACMed so that we can have as accurate of a plume map that we need to test our soil after you dumped all those toxic heavy metals on us. That's number one. I'd like your commitment here today, Ken, that you're going to make that happen. Number two, Nicole, thank you for everything you're doing and your comments last night. Just, again, very impressed with the County Health Department. Thank you for the name of the independent investigator, Scott Berger and Associates. I would just ask that you please make sure they ask for a repair and replacement schedule from MRC. And then I do have another question for you with regard to the independent investigation. When they conclude—
20 seconds.
Are those recommendations, suggestions, or can the county actually demand change, like insist that MRC?
Thank you. So to address your question, Heidi, when the independent investigation root cause analysis is completed by the consultant, they will have a variety of different corrective items, which will be for MRC. Some might be for the county themselves. I can't really speak to what I think all of those corrective actions will be, but the expectation is that there will be a corrective action plan to address all of the items that are brought up as a result of this independent investigation. Next, we'll go to Jillian.
Can you hear me? So my question is related to Heidi's, but also from last night. I am very interested in finding out who actually has enforcement power to make sure that the situation at the refinery is brought up to safety standards, and is that limited to fines, or can there be permits being revoked or suspended until the refinery is brought up to standards? Who has that authority, and what's that process?
So Jillian, I can only speak to the process here at Contra Costa Health Hazmat. I don't believe Phil will be speaking on the Air District side. That would best be for their compliance and enforcement division. And there are, I'm sure, other agencies who are also investigating this incident. But from the health hazmat side, the two avenues that we have in terms of any corrective actions are, one, the safety inspection that we are conducting through our engineering group. There may or may not be corrective actions that are implemented as a result of that. And then again, the independent incident investigation will have corrective actions with the expectation that an action plan is developed and those are completed. So it's not just that the independent investigation will result in a corrective action and then MRC does not have to do anything with it. They will have to address the corrective actions that are as of a result of this independent investigation. In terms of permits, I can't speak to that. The only other thing I can say is I know that we have brought this up multiple times, but there is also our referral to the DA for failure to notify as well. Thank you. Hey, are there any other questions or comments from the public, or do we have any additional questions or comment from the Oversight Committee members? I do see an additional hand raised. Oh, that is Kent. And Kayla, can we please promote Kent to panelist? And Kent, I am so sorry I didn't see you here. I believe this is Kent Hull, who is also a member of our Oversight Committee.
I'm sorry, you want Kent to be promoted?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, hello. Yes, I wanted to make one comment about the particulate matter size estimation. One thing is, the particulate matter size not only determines how large the particle is and therefore how far it is actually carried in the wind, et cetera. It also determines the absorption rate of the body. So PM 2.5, you can breathe into your lungs. PM 1.0 actually can be absorbed. Below PM 1 can actually cross the lung blood barrier. And even smaller than that can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And so the size of the particulate matter is actually very significant in physiological aspects, aside from just its propagation in a map like we were looking at. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask is, MRC has like a hotline that you can call if you have requests, like soil sampling or whatever. I don't know what they're offering, but if you're making requests to MRC, is there like an NDA that you then have to sign? And that's the extent of my questions.
Okay, I Kent, on your last question, I'm sorry, can you clarify? And who was that question directed to?
Anyone who can answer it. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, because you were asking about NDA, so I guess I'm just trying to get better clarification on your question.
Okay, yes. So if anybody has contacted MRC to request reimbursement or whatever for this unfortunate event, have they been requested to sign an NDA or some other non-disclosure agreement?
Okay, sorry, I understand now. I had missed a part of that. Okay, that's not something that I would be able to answer, Ken. I don't know if you would be able to speak to that, but that does seem like that would be a question that would be directed to MRC.
Yeah, I'd have to speak with Anne or somebody in public affairs to get the answer to that.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, I see Tony has his hand up, and then we'll move back to our public comment. Tony?
I'm sorry, Nicole, you went off there for a minute. Phil, the question I have is that when you're developing a model, in this case, when a facility has a problem and a model is required, is it normal to work with the facility to try and get as much data as you can? You know, like wind speed and conditions, all that. Do you use that information? And then, you know, if you're working with the facility, how is it that we didn't get that that information on the video that's available?
Yeah, so to answer your question, it is common to request information from facilities and for them to supply information. And so, we use the information that we obtain. We don't think to ask about information that we don't know about. If there's information we don't know about and we didn't request, we didn't use it. But it is good to know that there's additional information out there, and we can follow up to try to get that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, Kayla, if we can promote Michael Kent and give him his 2 minutes of public comment.
Sure. 1 second. Okay, Michael, go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Michael, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm sorry if you said this earlier, but I think it's worth clarifying for people, because now that this dispersion map is public, if you could talk about how residents who've been concerned about whether or not they can eat vegetables out of their garden or plant in their garden, if this map changes anything in terms of the health officer's health advisory, or if they should be using this as a guide at all in terms of determining whether it's safe for them to eat their vegetables.
I'm sorry, Michael, you're cutting out, so I only caught a part of that. I don't know if you have, maybe it's my end or your end, a connection issue, but if you don't mind restating the question or comment.
Sorry about that. I'll try again.
That's okay. We'll restart your time. Thank you.
Yeah, just because now that this dispersion model is public, I think it's worth reiterating for people how they should use it in terms of decision making about whether or not they can eat or not eat out of their garden. And so does this affect at all the health officer's health advisory? And should they be using this as a guide to decide whether or not, where they live is okay to eat or not? If you could just go over that again. I know you spoke about it somewhat last night, but I think it's worth repeating.
Sure, Michael. Thank you very much for bringing up that point. I do want to clarify that again, the intent of partnering with the Air District for this plume model was to help inform our soil sampling. So at this point, we still don't know what we don't know. What the plume model was able to tell us was give us a general idea of where deposition occurred. It is not able to speak to the health effects or if there is any potential health effects, any of the levels of what we would be concerned about. That is actually what is going to be determined by the work done by TRC. So at this point in time, there is nothing that is changing in terms of our health advisory or any of the information that we have put out. This is now just letting everyone know the information that we have available to provide as part of the information our toxicologists will be using to get to those answers, to let people know, in this area where we saw the deposition, what were the effects, if any. So nothing has changed on that end. We are still waiting for those answers to come from the toxicologist work. Okay, I'm going to do a last call for comments from the public. I'm not seeing any hands raised. And then a last call from any comments or any open business not related to the presentation from the Air District from our Oversight Committee members. Lauren.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I just wanted to provide the Oversight Committee with a quick update on some city communication pieces. At the request of the community's been asking for a while for mailing. And we've been going back and forth working with the county, and would also love some MRC support because it is a big financial lift to commit to mailing. But what we do have right in front of us to leverage is our water billing. And so this was brought up as an idea that we can stuff the envelopes with information about this oversight committee and the progress being made. So starting next week and for the next few billing cycles, the city will include a one-page, two-sided flyer that will contain information about the soil health advisory, this oversight committee, links to the hazmat or cchealth.org/hazmat/MRC website, where people can find information about these committee meetings and recordings of these committee meetings and all related documents. As well as I have a blurb on there about the water testing that the city did since this question has come up. And it came up again last night as well. And so I will have some information about the city's water standards and the testing that we did. And then on the backside of the mailer, it will include how to stay informed, and it will include information and links to the health department, the city, MRC, the Air District, pretty much everything that the city has kind of pulled together as go-to places for people to find information and resources that are helpful, or to file a complaint if necessary. So that information will be going. In fact, what I'll do, Nicole, is I'll share that. We just finalized that flyer today. I'll share it with you so you could share it with the Oversight Committee. We'll post it on the city's website as well. That's at cityofmartinez.org/MRC. And this will start going out into anyone who's a City of Martinez water customer will be receiving it starting in April and on for the next few months. So that's an update from me. I do want to also add on that this presentation, thank you, Dr. Martin, by the way. I didn't get a chance to personally thank you for giving the presentation today, but Dr. Martin also stopped by the city council meeting last night as well and gave the same presentation. And in fact, there was extensive public comment, lots of questions from the city council, and both the health department and the Air District took the time to really answer everybody's questions and hear everybody's concerns. So for those who are interested in seeing last night's council meeting recording, we'll have that up on our website soon. And that concludes updates from the city.
Thank you, Lauren. Cheryl?
Thanks. I just wanted to thank Lauren for that. That's going to be super to be able to get some information out in terms of a mailer and utilizing that access for us. I have two things to say. The city council directly also brought up the issue of ponds and pools that are presumably not operating right now because the pool filters and so forth are not turned on. Also, I wonder if Lauren wouldn't mind adding the segment of the DA's office, which is just that they are bringing or looking at the two specific areas so that people will be aware of that.
If I might, I believe, Cheryl, that it is out for print already.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, darn, no proofing on this one.
I was under the gun because we have deadlines to meet, but I did put a reference in there that the DA is investigating. I didn't put their contact information. I apologize. But I'll see if I can add some contact information on our website in case people are curious and want to know how to reach out to the DA.
Oh, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, any other comments from our Oversight Committee members? Go ahead, Tony.
I just want to thank Phil for coming on and giving this presentation. I saw it last night at the council meeting, so appreciate your time, Phil. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And yes, again, thank you very much, Phil, for joining us today. If I have no other comments from our Oversight Committee members, I did want to talk about the next steps here. So I think, from today's discussion, there was a lot of really good questions and comments brought up. So our next meeting, we will need to start thinking about scheduling very shortly or very quickly here to be able to have TRC come on board and we can have a discussion with them so that we can, discuss what the methodology is going to be and have them share with us their sampling plan so that we can move forward with that soil testing. Additionally, this was brought up last night at the City Council meeting, and I know it has been brought up beforehand in this Oversight Committee meeting, but we here at County Health are looking at ways that we can improve our communications and offer different venues of communications. I know our communications officer, Kim McCarl, has come on and said that we're going to put that on the agenda once we've done our selection of consultants, which we have done now. So I'm also hoping to get that discussion going through our Oversight Committee and looking at those changes that we can bring forward as well. So that'll be kind of the next items the Oversight Committee will be working on and the next things that we will be discussing in our upcoming meetings. I see that we have one last comment, so I'll turn it over back to Lauren.
Yeah, I don't know if the Oversight, my fellow committee members would be interested, but, for support with getting the public informed about when these meetings occur, it would be nice if we can get on a schedule so that, and it's easier for the public to remember. And I think now that we've kind of gotten off the ground, Nicole, I don't know if that imposes on plans you had, but, even if it's like every other week, it's a consistent time, a consistent day. And that would help, I think, our schedules. And I think that would probably help the public as well, kind of build it into their schedule if they want to attend.
No, I hear the comment, Lauren, and I think we are getting very close to that point where we can now start having a cadence. I think things have been very dynamic and that dynamic portion is now coming to a head. So I think at our next meeting, we can talk about that and what the frequency will be. I have kept them at Thursday, at least so that way we have day consistency, but I definitely hear that point and we will add that to our discussion topics for next meeting as well. Thank you. Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments, then I want to thank everyone for their time and for attending today's meeting. And we will get our information posted for the next meeting on that website. Again, I've dropped both of them in the chat, our cchealth.org, Hazmat MRC, and the one that Lauren had mentioned so that people are aware of where to go to find the information for these meetings. And I will see everyone at our next meeting. Thank you very much.